Well, good morning, Ph.D. TV. It is that time again. It's time for Doctors and Scientists. I am your host, Dr. Brian Hooker, and I am first and foremost a dad of a wonderful child who was exposed to a boatload of Tylenol when he was younger. It seemed like everything that we did had Tylenol associated with it. Like, okay, we're going to have an ear infection with a Tylenol chaser. We're going to vaccinate him and it's going to have a Tylenol chaser. We're going to circumcise him. And of course, the pediatrician recommends Tylenol. And so we're going to talk about that today. We really need to look at it. And this is such an important episode. I want you to tell your friends, I want this to go viral. We need this episode to go viral, and you'll see in a minute. But right now, let's roll a video that is going to talk a little bit about the research of our to remain secret right now guest.
More than 25 lines of evidence have allowed some scientists to conclude that exposure of susceptible babies and children to acetaminophen causes many, if not most, cases of autism spectrum disorder. However, other studies have been published concluding that acetaminophen is perfectly safe. One underlying reason for the disagreement is due to something called confounding factors. Often, adjusting for confounding factors is a vitally important and extremely helpful part of statistical analysis. For example, drinking coffee has been associated with lung cancer in multiple studies, which means that people who drink coffee tend to have a higher risk of lung cancer. This could lead scientists to conclude that drinking coffee might cause lung cancer, but when scientists took a step back and looked at the big picture, they found a confounding factor. People who drink lots of coffee are also more likely to smoke cigarettes. When scientists adjusted for the confounding factor of smoking, they saw that there was no direct connection between coffee and lung cancer. In this case, smoking was the confounding factor that made it look like coffee might cause lung cancer, even though it doesn't. Unfortunately, some scientists made the mistake of thinking that factors related to something called oxidative stress are confounding factors that causes autism. In other words, they thought that the situation with coffee and cancer was the same as the situation with acetaminophen and autism. But overwhelming evidence tells us that this is not correct. Overwhelming evidence tells scientists that the correct equation is very different. Acetaminophen plus oxidative stress causes neurodevelopmental problems. Oxidative stress is what happens when our body can't keep up with all of life's demands on our immune system and metabolism. Overwhelming evidence also tells us that numerous genetic and environmental factors come together to cause oxidative stress, which makes babies and small children susceptible to injury by acetaminophen. In this case, the numerous genetic and environmental factors leading to oxidative stress are not confounding factors for the induction of autism. Those factors interact with acetaminophen to create injury. It is a rudimentary principle in statistics that treating interacting factors the same as confounding factors yields a false result. Computer simulations prove that even when acetaminophen exposure combined with oxidative stress causes half of all cases of autism, treating factors related to oxidative stress as confounding factors makes acetaminophen look much safer than it is, or even perfectly safe. Those computer simulations replicate the effects of published mistakes made when analyzing real-world data, shown in this graph. Some papers say that these calculations show that acetaminophen is safe, but these calculations actually show that acetaminophen will not lead to the induction of autism only if oxidative stress is sufficiently low. If individuals have sufficient oxidative stress, abundant and robust evidence demonstrates the potential for acetaminophen to induce autism. When scientists first began publishing studies of healthcare databases looking at the safety of acetaminophen in 2013, they assumed that factors related to oxidative stress might be confounding factors. More importantly, they treated those oxidative stress-related factors as confounding factors in their calculations and reported the results that way. This was strictly an assumption made at that time, with no justification. Unfortunately, this error has been propagated extensively in the medical literature, affecting dozens of publications and obscuring reality for more than a decade. The error has caused many investigators to underestimate the effect of acetaminophen on the developing brain, and has caused a few to disregard it completely. It is the combined weight of evidence from numerous fields of medicine and science over many decades which gives rise to dozens of lines of independent evidence. Evidence that allows scientists to conclude that a causal relationship between acetaminophen and autism exists. As the confusion regarding confounding factors demonstrates, even rudimentary mistakes in a single type of study on the safety of acetaminophen can be very misleading.
Wow. So you can wash out an effect by using these confounding factors that are actually interacting factors that show very, very strong evidence regarding the connection between acetaminophen use and autism. Let's bring on our guest. This is Dr. William Parker. Dr. Parker is visiting research professor at the University of North Carolina. He is a retired professor from Duke University, where he was in residence for 27 years. And also just a great friend, a great colleague. Welcome to the show. Yes, you can take a drink. I will keep talking. Welcome to the show, Dr. William Parker.
Dr. Hooker, it's a pleasure to be here. A great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, you have done this for a while. When did you start actually looking at acetaminophen as, such a primary trigger to causing autism?
Well, so we started looking at autism. I had some renown in the field of science looking at gut issues.
Right.
So then we started looking at autism because, as you know, many of the children with autism have problems with their digestion. And so that was about 2007. I think by about there was a big study that came out, not big in terms of the size of the study, but big in terms of its potential impact, that came out in 2008. And I think by 2010, we had a good idea that something was not right with acetaminophen. And some other people, I think, were definitely on top of that at that time. But then by 2015, it just didn't happen overnight. By 2015, we were fairly certain. By 2017, we published our first big paper on the topic that said, look, and it's what the video was talking about, is there's all these factors, genetic, epigenetic, environmental, that every kid has, and then those factors interact with acetaminophen. So and then of course, more recently, we published a lot more as we've accumulated more and more evidence and continue to refine our evidence.
It's absolutely incredible what you've put together. Now, that original paper that came out in 2008 really caught my eye, but William, it didn't catch my eye until you pointed it out to me. But they actually looked at acetaminophen plus oxidative stress, and they also looked at just the oxidative stress alone. In this case, I think it was the MMR vaccine. And the MMR vaccine was not necessary or sufficient in causing autism. But when you combined it with the acetaminophen, then it was. Basically, so what you're saying is that for a majority of cases of autism, I want to cut to the chase right now because I think this is super important. The majority of the cases of autism involve Tylenol use early in life, not prenatally, but postnatally. And that if you do not have that with oxidative stress, then you do not get autism. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And I would hasten to point out that the thing that causes the most oxidative stress is something called birth. So if you look at, where the risk is, the biggest risk is for obstetrics, right? If you look at, it's a beautiful study. First author's name is J.I. You look at that study and you divide women into 3 groups based on how much acetaminophen they have on board when the umbilical cord is clamped. And just in 3 groups, the highest group has almost 4 times, it's 3.6 times as much autism prevalence as the lowest group. So, that and you run the numbers on that, that's a little bit over half of all cases of autism right there. And the reason why is you go back in the literature to the 1960s, and when you're first born, you just can't metabolize that drug efficiently. You're missing it's called glucuronidation. It's this enzymatic pathway that's not functioning very well when you're first born. And if you don't have that pathway, then acetaminophen gets shunted into a toxic pathway. And it turns out that domestic cats, every veterinarian knows domestic cats have the same deficiency, and every veterinarian knows you can't give a domestic cat acetaminophen. You just can't do it at any dose. It's not safe. And this just got missed when it's this incredibly tragic situation. It got missed when people were evaluating the safety of acetaminophen back in the 1960s and 1970s for pediatric use. And so they only looked at liver function. And what we know is that we now know that at least in laboratory animals, you can give them so much acetaminophen that kills the animal, but it hurt their liver if they're a neonate, right? But for adults, of course, this is where we thought that, oh, the liver is so important, because in adults, if you take an overdose of acetaminophen, definitely not recommended, because it will kill your liver and you'll die slowly over a period of 3 days. This is completely just not what happens with neonates. Neonates get brain damage.
This is so absolutely incredible. And there's so many factors that point to this. I want to unpack at least a few. Now you have identified 30 different lines of evidence that show the relationship between acetaminophen use and autism. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a little bit arbitrary how you divide up 30. So for the information I just gave you about cats, we count that as one. But then, the information in, say, laboratory rats and mice, which causes huge changes, long-term changes in their behavior in mice, even at very low doses. That was published by a guy named Henrik Weiber back around 2014. So those kinds of things, we count that as a separate line of information. We could we could lump them together if we wanted to, or we can separate them out. But it's again a little bit arbitrary. There's a lot of things that involve biochemistry that we lump together.
Right.
They're all pointing the same way, but we keep it around. It's about 30 lines of evidence, and the video said 24. I think we at the time. Right now we have, through peer review, we have 24, but you can find in preprints, which are before peer review. And we've got one paper that's been under peer review since January of 2005, and we still haven't actually gotten a scientific review on it. So these things take time. So everything we know, we put it out in what's called a preprint, and your audience may have explained that, they may just know that it's getting the data out early so everybody can look at it.
Right. You need to check out this preprint. So I think this is at preprints.org, and all you need to do is to put in, I think William Parker and acetaminophen should bring it up. But it is, this is compelling evidence. And the thing that I like about your latest preprint is that the 30 lines of evidence are in a table. And it's written that I feel like it's layman friendly. I mean, it is written in a scientific publication format, but I found the information easily understandable. I showed it to my wife; she thought it was easily understandable, and we were very quickly converts to this line of thought. We know that, first of all, I know unvaccinated children who are autistic. I know children who have never seen a vaccine, period. Never seen a vaccine, period.
There were two studies early on when people were thinking the MMR caused. Two studies early on out of Europe and they were sibling studies. So you don't need a lot of people, because, younger siblings of people with autism tend to have a lot of autism. And those showed that no difference when the parents stopped vaccinating. And I think at that point, it was before the acetaminophen idea came out. So I think people were still using maybe even more acetaminophen, because they were getting concerned about what happens when my kid gets sick. So I think, and if you run the stats on that and ask the right question, is it possible that the vaccines cause autism? The answer is no, it's not. And furthermore, with timing right now, the initial parents' observation was it was the MMR vaccine, and we know it's it's one other vaccine component in particular that does correlate through time with the autism pandemic, but that's not the one that the parents identified. So I think we got to trust the parents on this one. It's some common denominator that goes along with the vaccine that is temporally or in time associated with the rise in autism, and acetaminophen is it.
Well, and you see that, and we're not saying that vaccines are necessarily good. We're not saying, okay, you should go out and get your vaccination and then, not treat with acetaminophen. What we are saying is that these are coincidental. When vaccines are given, most likely you're getting a practitioner who says, take Tylenol in order to control any type of low grade after the vaccine. And so, and this is, as a parent, I went through this. I went through the regression of autism. And again, Dr. Parker's video very, very elegantly shows an oxidative stress factor is a component of it. So vaccines are not completely out of the equation. Am I understanding that right?
Well, like I said, remember the number one thing is birth. So
Correct.
then, and the circumcision, there's any infection, and of course, vaccines mimic an infection. So, there's a laundry list of things. And I should hasten to point out, we're not sure if it's safe during pregnancy. It looks like maybe ADHD is probably a result of heavy use during pregnancy, and maybe some cases of autism, maybe 20%, but probably not more. Like I said, most of it happens. And, there's true confounding factors on these. For example, we don't know if the people that are using it heavily during pregnancy are also more likely to give it to their child. So there's some things that it's very difficult to sort out. And I would hasten to point out, Dr. Hooker, that of our 30 lines of evidence, only 2 of them are affected by this issue of confounding factors. Only 28 more not affected. So the problem is that the way that we do these studies in modern medicine is we weigh heavily, in terms of our thinking, it's weighed heavily on what do these studies looking at these big healthcare databases show? What are the associations that pop out of there? And all of that has to do with confounding factors. And that's one of the issues. There's another issue that we'll probably get to talk about in a few minutes, but so the 28 lines of evidence, for example, the fact that everybody knows you can't give it to a domestic cat. You can't give acetaminophen to a domestic cat. That is not affected by the fact that, the laboratory mice with only 2 doses get permanent learning disabilities. And these are 2 doses that are even lower than what's given to some babies who receive a suppository of acetaminophen. So, it's amazing the data that's out there, and only 2 of them are really affected by the confounding factors. And unfortunately, those have weighed heavily in the scientific discussion of the whole problem.
When you talk about prenatal use of acetaminophen, what other factors, why wouldn't that be as much of a stressor or as much of a factor, during prenatal development as compared to postnatal?
When a guy with a Ph.D. in chemistry asks you that question, he's leading you on. So, that's a really good question, Dr. Hooker. So of course, as we know, if you lined up 100,000 people from who can metabolize acetaminophen the best, the most efficiently, the safest, versus who can metabolize it the worst, then up on the safest end, you would get pregnant women, and you get people with cystic fibrosis, which is really interesting, and then they don't get autism. But then down at the very, very other end, you would get a newborn. And as soon as you clamp the umbilical cord, the mother's liver is no longer there. And that mother's liver is really good at protecting the fetus. But so the way the whole system is set up, the way that biology has it set up, is that when you're first born, the only thing that you're really getting is breast milk, which has already been processed by the mother, right? So a newborn isn't really designed to get, a bunch of xenobiotics. That's the bottom line in terms of our biology.
As you said before, the toxicity for acetaminophen that was determined was based on liver toxicity. It was not based on neurotoxicological processes that can go on. Now, what about this? And I don't think this is a hard deadline, but what about children under 5? I mean, what is it about children under 5 that is different than, say, a 6 or 7 year old getting a dose of acetaminophen?
Right. So the period of rapid brain growth in humans ends about the age of 5. So we actually include 5 in the range. We say, well, wait till it looks like at age 6. And of course, there's super rare cases of autism induction much later in life, and
Right,
they have to do with a catatonic state and so forth. They're very, very rare. But in
right,
general, right, regressive autism, you don't see that by the age of 6, and it's even rare at the age of 5, but not vanishingly rare. Say so, just at it's rapid brain growth, so that's
right.
what the whole issue is.
Right. What about the pathways, though? Is that is that something that that kick in? Because one of the things that I'm very cognizant of is that my son is a really, really poor methylator, and he has impaired sulfation as well. So things that would normally detoxify something like acetaminophen, paracetamol. I want to include that maybe.
Paracetamol, yeah, most people know it
Yeah.
as Calpol over there, and we know it as
Right.
Tylenol.
When they say that, is that, is that what is my son missing that might make him more susceptible from a genetic perspective? I mean, is that going to affect the detoxification of acetaminophen?
Yeah, so the study back in 1990 showed that kids with autism have a really difficult time processing acetaminophen. So there's three main pathways everybody uses to process acetaminophen. There's
Hmm.
glucuronidation, which is safe, and we mentioned that that is not working well in newborns. There's
No.
sulfation, which people with autism are they're very challenged. Typically, they're very challenged within that pathway. And then there's the other pathway, which is the toxic pathway that produces a toxic intermediate. It acts like it's just basically a poison. And then there's a way you can bail out of that pathway with a molecule called glutathione. And a lot of people with autism, if you have oxidative stress, that's just not going to be working well. I mean, we keep using this term oxidative stress, but there's so many things that cause oxidative stress, including a lot of genetic factors. And this is the whole problem, is that you don't really know in advance who's going to be sensitive to acetaminophen and who's not. We know that acetaminophen by itself is perfectly safe. The issue is in oxidative stress. And the methylation sulfation pathway that you mentioned, if that is deficient, that puts someone at much greater risk than if they are not deficient in that pathway, because that's a nice, safe pathway to get rid of, to metabolize, process acetaminophen.
Wow. Now, explain then the rise in autism. Then we always for eons I have correlated this with the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. What then happened at that particular point in time then to cause this explosion in autism?
Yeah, so there's a couple of, probably we can look at three different factors. So back in the 1970s, aspirin was the go-to drug, but it caused
Right,
some stomach problems. So people were thinking, okay, can we switch to Tylenol? Maybe it wasn't popular. Tylenol essentially was introduced in 1886 for practical intents and purposes, but not technical
right,
purposes. But it doesn't matter. The point is that in the 1970s, they were thinking maybe we could go to this drug for kids because it doesn't cause as much stomach upset as aspirin. But then what happened? The big game changer was about 1983, when they decided, whoa, aspirin is causing something called Reye syndrome. It's pretty rare, 1 in 10,000, and we even know, you kind of know who's susceptible to getting Reye syndrome. The bottom line is it's bad. It can be lethal. So there was just a wholesale switch. I know one of the surgeons is on our latest paper that
hmm
was a practicing physician at that time, and he remembers having 2 kids in the hospital with Reye syndrome when they made the switch over to acetaminophen. So that happened at 83 or so. And so you see a gradual tick up in the 70s, and then it really starts going up in the 1980s. And then there's something called direct to consumer advertising, which I'm sure you know a lot about, much more than I do,
right.
but that really drove up drug use in general through the 90s. There's a couple of investigators, Bill Shaw's one, Peter Goodid's another, that have written a lot about, does acetaminophen interact with other chemicals in the environment? So If you add a pesticide, which using these same pathways, the glucuronidation, the sulfation, those
Right.
pesticides or those, say, just preservatives, you've got a lot of plastic derivatives in the environment, all these kinds of things can add up and tax the body and cause more oxidative stress. So there, as we add more and more things to our environment, then of course the acetaminophen, we're still putting in the same amount of acetaminophen, which is a large amount of that drug, by the way, compared to most drugs that we use. It's just a
Right.
very large amount. It's 15 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. And, some drugs are less than 1 milligram per kilogram. You take 25 milligrams for an adult for your whole body. So the bottom line is it's a lot of changes over time. It was just one thing led to another. And it was considered so safe, Dr. Hooker, that really nobody was even tracking how much of it got used. We
Right.
did a deep dive in the literature on that, just trying to figure out, when did it really start getting used a lot? And you can't find that information in the literature. You can find that, well, nobody really tracked it very well. And when people did track it, they got numbers all over the place because they asked the question in different ways. If you're in a medical center and somebody asks, did you use this what drugs did you use? You're not going to put the stuff in your medicine cabinet down. Well, you have to ask specifically, did you use Tylenol or hundreds of other products that have Tylenol or acetaminophen in them.
And that is so important because that information is not available in medical coding. And one of the things that has been so frustrating trying to track it down is that you have to look for a surrogate, like you said, labor and delivery. Once the cord is clamped, then the mom's liver is out of the picture. Circumcision, another one. And then the interacting, not really the confounding, but the interacting factors that might go with that.
Two issues that have really derailed, and there's a third, more minor one. So you mentioned the seminal study in 2008. A minor issue is that some of these seminal studies that really should change the game, they kind of get ignored. They get, well, it doesn't make any sense, so we'll just dismiss it. It must be wrong. All right, so that's one issue. The other issue we mentioned is that people are they're treating interacting factors as confounding factors, which is basically saying that if you're perfectly healthy with no risk factors, with no oxidative stress, acetaminophen is safe. We agree with that. That's not safe in terms of not causing autism. So in our laboratory rats, it does cause long-term increased anxiety when meeting a new social partner. So even if it doesn't cause autism, it could be doing other things. So we don't know if it's safe even for people without oxidative stress, but we can say it doesn't cause autism. So the third big factor is that the third big problem with the science of this is that when people are looking at whether or not acetaminophen is associated with autism or ADHD or other things, they only look at one period of exposure. And the way it looks is that probably sometime during pregnancy, acetaminophen can induce autism. And then there's a huge spike in sensitivity at labor and delivery. So the obstetrics practice is huge. And then up to age 5, you can get regressive autism, same drug and same, this is very, very similar to alcohol and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, right? It's a single chemical. It's an analgesic, and alcohol also blocks fever. So similar in many ways. And it induces a spectrum disorder under the right conditions. So if you only look at one little time period, you'll get this odds ratio, say 1.7 with heavy use during pregnancy, which just came out of Drexel University looking at European data. You get something like that and you say, well, it's only the quarter of women that use the most. It's only 1.7, and it's due to all these confounding factors. Anyway, let's just ignore it. That's a mistake, right? Because you got to add that in with what happens during the peripartum period, during labor and delivery and obstetrics, and you got to add that in with circumcision. If you give other vaccines around the time of birth with acetaminophen, whatever else is going on that is giving you acetaminophen exposure, including these kids with these massive problems with infections and fever at age 12 months, 18 months. There was a Danish study that showed 2/3 of all kids within a 3-month period, infants, these are infants less than a year old, were getting exposed to acetaminophen. So it's really a problem.
It really is. And, I appreciate so much your body of work to expose this, to get the lines of evidence and to really communicate this well. One of the things that I've noticed about your publications, and I recommend that people read these. I mean, so many people get sidelined reading science, and I've even told people, hey, you get a question, email me, email Children's Health Defense. I mean, when you get stuck on these publications, do it. And especially your lines of evidence, I find, are written in such a way that the layperson can understand them. So where is our starting point in the education? If we're talking to the viewers directly, if they're agnostic on this issue, what is the starting point? What literature should they read first, Dr. Parker?
Well, so it depends on their perspective, right? If they're coming in as, hey, I just need to know this so I can protect my loved ones, then I would say, okay, we published a paper in a journal called Children. It has a video to go with it. It's a great video. This is the publisher's MDPI. We published a couple of papers now with MDPI, and they've made videos, and you saw one of those videos earlier on. And a lot of, we published also a paper with the oldest pediatric institution in Italy. We published a paper with the flagship journal for the Korean Pediatric Association. But the one I would point people to, and especially if you're interested in just how it works, when it happens, when acetaminophen triggers autism, that's a paper in a journal called Children. And that one's been viewed more than 32,000 times. And we wrote this to be accessible to everyone. So our latest paper, one of our collaborators is an award-winning poet and a professor of English who teaches persuasive writing. So, we try really hard to make these things accessible to people. So yeah, it's in a journal called Children. It's published a couple of years back. And if you just search for, the MDPI, which is the publisher, and the journal Children, and say acetaminophen and autism, it'll show up.
Wonderful. And we'll make sure that the hyperlink is in the show notes as well. So Dr. Parker, thank you so much for all you've done for children and for elucidating this. I'm sure that the road has not been rocky for you at all, that it's just, been a skate, and you have the life of Riley, right?
Well, if you do the right thing, the universe has a way of looking out for us. Is that right, Dr. Hooker?
Absolutely. No,
Right.
yeah, the bills do get paid eventually. But thank you. I know you've made a life sacrifice doing the right thing, and so we thank you so much for it and for imparting that to us today.
It's my pleasure to be here, Dr. Hooker. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us for this important episode. This is groundbreaking. And so you need to share this with your friends. You need to share this with your loved ones. You could prevent this from happening just by sharing this video today and getting the information of Dr. William Parker to your loved ones. So you do that and have a great day today.
Hello. What did you think of VAXxed?
Well, I mean, I have a true passion for children with autism, and my husband
Do you have a child with autism?
Well, that's an interesting question. About 3 years ago, my grandson started seeming like he was getting more and more disconnected, and I noticed these just subtle things. But he just wasn't, there was just something not right about him. So I was asking my husband, he's a physician.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you are?
Yes, he's a physician. So I started saying, what would you think is going on with him? And, he's like, well, I'm really not sure, I definitely see what you're saying. So I started studying. And I've been studying for 4 years now, autism. I've been studying vaccines. I mean, you can pretty much say I'm obsessed with it. And I just want to help. I really am avid about getting on board and getting this message out. And even the way that he is a doctor now.
What
Has
kind of
completely
doctor are
changed.
you?
I'm an emergency room physician, and I've seen a lot of kids that's come in after having vaccines that's had seizures, and even to the point I believe that sudden infant death syndrome has been misdiagnosed, and I think it's probably vaccine injury in some cases. And to shift gears to the point that not really thinking that the vaccine was causing it, now listening to her, and she's brought all this to my attention, and doing some research myself, and finally thinking that this could actually be vaccines that's doing all this, and then calling the pediatrician and saying, look, you know, got this kid in here, you just gave him shots, you know, the other day, and they're having seizures, and obviously it's a vaccine that's causing it, and just having a total denial from that end of it, from the pediatrician side. And I've seen that happen over and over again. In fact, one of our colleagues who now works in the emergency room as a certified, he was a neonatologist, and his son actually had a vaccine injury, and he totally denies the fact that it was a vaccine injury, even though it happened right afterwards. The child now has a form of what he thinks is like cerebral palsy, you know, but I'm sure it's a vaccine injury. And I've spoken to him about it, and he's still in total denial.
As a doctor, why do you think the pediatricians behave like that?
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's a huge part of their income. I mean, and plus, I think the medical community as a whole is kind of just ignorant. I mean, I don't think they want to hear this. They believe in people like the CDC, and when you start realizing that you can't believe those people anymore, it causes a huge problem for you in your practice. I mean, it has for me, even then when I start thinking about vaccines. That's just a little part for me because I don't give a lot of vaccines. It certainly has changed the way I give Tdap, because I don't give Tdap to hardly anyone. In fact, I haven't given it in years now. When you start looking at the incidence of tetanus and how many people actually get tetanus, it's ridiculous. They give everybody that comes in, even with a corneal abrasion. I don't think there's even been a case of a corneal abrasion causing tetanus in the last 100 years, but yet the hospital wants you to give Tdap to people that have a corneal abrasion.
And here's my husband. He refuses to take a flu vaccine. I mean, he's required as a physician.
So what happens when you refuse to take a flu vaccine? I thought it was mandatory.
Oh, this is so funny. Tell them about last year when you had to wear a mask.
The hospital required us to have anyone that didn't get a vaccine were marked, so to speak, by wearing a mask. And I just basically refused to wear the mask. And I told them that I felt like if I was going to wear the mask, it was to protect me from the people that got the vaccine.
Yeah, from the shedding.
And in fact, I said if that's true, and the healthcare providers that are being required to wear a mask, why isn't it that the family members that come in here aren't all required to wear a mask as well? Because we don't know which ones of those have gotten the flu vaccine when they come into the hospital.
And the fact that the flu vaccine was found 0% effective.
Well,
and they were acting like they were being somewhat
when they came
immune.
out and said that I think it was 2 years ago, the strains that they had given everybody was like, I think it was at the best was 30-40%, and that's their numbers, which is probably more like 5 or 10% effective. You know, I said at that point in time, why isn't everyone wearing a mask?
Yeah.
If that's true,
I mean,
because the vaccine was not effective.
Are there other doctors that refuse vaccines and believe
there are some that do that. Most of them just fall in line with the rest of the herd, so to speak. I don't do that anymore. I won't do it. And so I told them they either have to fire me or I just find another job somewhere, because I'm not going to wear a mask, first of all, and second, I'm not going to get a vaccine. And I work in emergency medicine. I'm around the flu all the time. Do I ever get the flu? No. Why don't I ever get the flu? It's not because I don't get a vaccine. No, I think it's because I have a healthy gut. I take care of it. I take probiotics. I mean, I do things to
how many gastroenterologists don't even know about a probiotic?
Oh, yeah, that's true, too. I mean, it's amazing. If you're emergency medicine, you go in and you find a gastroenterologist, a patient that a gastroenterologist is taking care of, and they're not even on probiotics. I'm thinking, what is...
When you were at medical school, how much did you get taught about vaccines?
Very little. Very little. And what you got basically was told, these are the things that you need to give to your patients.
So it's all about giving it to...
This is the schedule. I mean, yeah, you learn about adjuvants and you learn about the immune system and how it works, but as far as what the vaccine actually does, and you never heard about the negative effect of a vaccine. Never.
And this is my question, let's talk about adjuvants. Let's talk about the unnatural way that you assault the system with an adjuvant like peanut oil. My son has a peanut, the allergy that he could die from a peanut, and I truly believe it's from an adjuvant they used in a vaccine.
Yeah, we did some study on
Yes.
that, and I think it was called adjuvant 19 or something like, or 16 or 19. I'm not sure which it is now, but it was made from peanut oil, and it was put into the vaccine as an adjuvant to help to make it work better.
Yeah.
But obviously, when a child is given, an injection of peanut oil, it doesn't go through the gut the way it normally is supposed to, the way God intended it, then obviously it can have all kinds of negative
Yeah, it
effects.
went through
I
the
think
bloodstream.
that has caused
It
some
didn't go
of
through the
this.
gut.
So what did you think of the film, Vax?
What did I think of it?
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly reinforced a lot of the things that we've been studying, and my wife has been bringing to my attention. I mean, it's caused a huge dilemma for me, obviously, in the medical field, because now I'm starting to question a lot of the things that we were taught in medical school, first of all. And then secondly, it's also starting to just make me wonder about the CDC, all the people that send all the information to the physicians. Certainly, I think pharmaceuticals are heavily involved in the medical education portion of what we get, and it causes a problem. I mean, I'm shifted gears a lot. I think medicine is for emergencies mainly. I work in emergency medicine, so that's the only reason I can continue my career. If I was a pediatrician and I saw the film, I'd probably want to I'd get the heck out of it.
Right, they do tend to walk out.
Yeah, I'd get another one.
Well, so look, I hope you keep your job.
No.
But if
I think
you
I will.
don't, just let us know where you're practicing, and you'll have every family of an autistic child coming to see
Well,
you.
thank
So
you.
please know you will never be alone.
No,
And,
I understand that. Right. And
People
I'm
really
glad.
appreciate your honesty and your
Yeah.
bravery, because you are brave.
Well, I mean, you're
So,
looked at you got a third eye on your head when you go to a medical meeting and you say, "Hey, I think these vaccines aren't good for us."
yeah.
They're like,
You're a marked man.
"What do you mean?"
But
You
none
know,
of us
it's
are
like-
vaccinated now, because all the vaccine, they're all worn out. I mean, they're getting ready to start the adult vaccine schedule. The way I look at it is none of us are vaccinated. And I don't believe in herd immunity, and I don't believe in vaccines, and I don't believe in how it works. I just don't believe in any of it. So it's not a fact that I have a grandson that was just born. He's he's 2.5 now. He's not been vaccinated yet. He's had nothing.
Yeah.
That's your son or daughter?
That's our daughters.
Yeah.
You're an amazing family. Do you know that?
Well, it's just because of what
Yeah.
we've learned.
No,
and it's
Yeah.
from going down this trail and studying the truth about vaccines.
Well, and it's people like yourself putting
Right.
these kind of things out that's going to change things. I mean, obviously, it's not going to come from the medical community. I don't think. I don't see that
I think
happening.
I know the parents are going to win this. Keep telling them so, but it's people like you as well that speak the truth.
Yeah, I mean,
you guys are going to help us.
That's the part of it. I mean, I think we need to somehow learn how to do that better. And I think when we do that someday, I think we may make some difference.
Thank you. Thank you for telling the story. Thank you so much for
You're
your
welcome.
opinions and
Thank
being
you.
I love
who
you.
you are.
I love what you're doing.